hit it. It's sitting there spinning.
Okay.
Trying again. Doesn't matter whether you're fighting Skynet or the AFC West, you want a Connor on your side. What does the slot nickel look like? I'm Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, football and sci-fi fans. This is Locked On Chiefs, part of Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every single day. Like, sub, and hit the bell here on YouTube. And join us on the Apple or Spotify audio platforms or anywhere you get a free podcast, because we're here 5 days a week for you. And you get that much more on our text line at 816-357-8781. We are brought to you today by Gametime, because no matter what you're looking for, you can download the app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONNFL to get a $20 discount off of your first ticket purchase anywhere. Terms do apply, but check that out. We appreciate you guys joining us. I'm excited. It's a Friday show where I get to have a little bit of fun, and I am kind of a sci-fi geek, so I had to throw a Terminator reference in there. If you guys don't know that or you're too young, go watch a good movie. I'm just going to say it. We're going to talk today about depth. Guys that can go inside and cover the wiry dudes. That's what we're looking for. There's going to have to be a scenario of adjustment, and there's a couple of options. We're going to do that here coming up later, because it all feeds off of the top topic. And we start with not John Connor, but Charmarri, who is now stepping into his second season in Kansas City and is taking on a critical role, one that we've seen a progression at. So far in OTAs, what we expect, at least at the beginning of the season, I expect it to last the whole year, is that Jamari Connor is your nickel corner at this point. A guy that can do a little bit of everything. He can be a robber safety. We've seen him bring some hits. We've seen him play aggressive and physical. And I do think he's going to bring that to the nickel corner spot, because they've allowed Trent McDuffie to move over to the outside. We're going to go down the outside corners here on another show coming up next week. But the nickel spot is the key one. That's where Trent McDuffie's been locking it down for a little bit. And so this is a big mantle for Jamari Connor to take on. I'm ready for it, but there's got to be some growing pains, right?
You would think so. The interesting thing about this to me is how it's going to affect the shakeup in roster numbers. I mean, obviously we need to talk about nickel corner, and Charmarri is going to be that guy, but is he going to be listed is he going to be looked at as a corner? Is that going to shake up, and are they going to keep 6 corners with him included and less safeties? It's going to be interesting to see how that affects things, because I was expecting him to be the third safety off the bench. But if he's playing this nickelback role, I think you're in a situation where, Jaden Hicks becomes your next safety off the bench. So then maybe you're looking at another safety. And it all plays into how this roster is going to be built. And Connor played fantastic last year when he stepped in. He didn't play at the corner position, really. He played safety, and he stepped in and was successful, and I believe had a pick in the playoffs. So a lot to say from a rookie, and I do think that it's exciting to see what he can do this year. I do know that when you look at back last year, Jaden Hicks is getting a lot of attention right now from Steve Spagnuolo. Last year, that guy was Jamari Connor. Connor was the one that was getting pulled aside in mini camps and in OTAs and talked to, and it's not a bad talking. It's what do you see, trying to get them up to speed as quick as possible so they can use them on the field. And he is a jack of all trades.
I completely agree with you. And it takes me back to the days of Ghost being in the Chiefs defensive backfield. Old Ron was listed as a DB because he did it all. And I wonder if we're not going back to that as guys that have to be, because of their usage, listed as multiple players. That's okay. I think you still have to keep 10 DBs, maybe 11. And I don't really care what they list him at, as long as he can fulfill the role, which is, like you said, very, very different from being a space safety, whether that was closer to the box or when he was playing high. It's very different having a guy in your face. I love the physicality, and I think, especially next week when we talk about the outside corners, physicality is the thread throughout this. And I think this is going to sound bad, folks. This is not a dig on Trent McDuffie, but Trent McDuffie is probably the least physical corner on this roster, and he was able to be elite at the nickel.
And that's saying something, because he is still physical. I'm just going to say he is still a physical player. He still plays the run. That is really saying something, calling him the least physical corner on this roster. But you're right. I mean, if you look at just size and his stature, he is the most diminutive corner on the roster. I don't think there's anybody that's smaller. And the rest of them, I mean, you got Miles Battle, who's 6'5". The depth or the
Nazee's
difference
a little
in
bit
size
smaller.
and corners
Nick's a
is
little
just
bit
so different. Yeah,
it is.
Okay, well,
Trent's style is more position than it is hit, whereas Charmarri, I think we're really going to see the difference back to Shad Breeland, guys that are going to get and honestly thrive on the contact, and back down at the nickel spot, which I think the league is going more and more as a place to try to exploit defenses, especially if they're going to play two high safeties, which the Chiefs are going to do a good volume. It's not the primary defense shell, but they're going to have that. I think having the more physical player in at the nickel who has the recovery speed off the initial go really sets them up. I can't say that the secondary is going to be able to be as good as it was last year without LeJerry Sneed on the roster, but it sets them up to be a different kind of secondary that could be comparable in terms of the yardage allowed and the big plays allowed.
Yeah, and it's funny because you talk about the secondary and everybody goes automatically to the pass, and you're talking about a physical guy that wants to come up and hit. That's going to also play in the running game, and that's going to be a big deal in the running game. And we've talked about the defensive tackles already, and one of the things that the Chiefs have struggled with over the years has been the running game. And I'm not saying a corner is going to make all the difference, but a nickel corner that's willing to stick his head in there is going to help that running defense and is going to help in short yardage situations where maybe they have three wide, but they're going to run, week one against Derrick Henry. Maybe he's going to have to be in there and try to take out Derrick Henry. That's not going to be a fun assignment for somebody his size, but he's willing to do it. That's the most important thing, is he's willing to stick his neck in there and do it, and he's willing to go after those types of players. And that's exactly what you need at that position, regardless of whether it's in the running game, in the run defense, or if it's in pass defense.
And you have a very good point. And when you're subbing out from the base, you're taking a linebacker off to put that nickel corner on there. If he's more physical, you're losing less and making yourself less vulnerable when you're in that set, which is really the predominant set for this defense now, in having that linebacker off and the nickel on. So I think it sets them up to, again, be a little bit different, but be able to be comparable in terms of their production or their stopping of production from the other offense. But you can't just rely on that. There are a number of scenarios that could see and force Connor out of that position. What do you do in that case? What are the other options on this roster? We're breaking that down right after this here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, getting tickets over at Arrowhead is always a challenge. I love using Gametime to get that done because I am usually the kind that comes in late on a week and tries to pick up those tickets at the last minute. If you're looking to get to MLB at Kauffman as well, especially with all the nonsense going on about where these stadiums are going to be and where these teams are going to play, you probably want to get to Kauffman now. And to make your ticket choices easier and clearer, the best way to do is with Gametime, because you get up to 60% savings on last-minute tickets for baseball games as well as any other event, football, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you're looking for. And they give you everything that you need, from 110% back if you find a deal that's better, on top of all-in pricing with no hidden fees and the deals. You get zone deals that are specific to areas of the stadium. You can see your ticket and the view from that seat before you buy it. It all goes into this app and gives you the best ticket buying experience you can get. It takes the guesswork out of MLB tickets with Gametime. Download that app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONNFL. It's going to get you $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, all you got to do is create an account. Download the app and use our code LOCKEDONNFL, and you're going to get $20 off those tickets instantly. Download Gametime. It's the last-minute tickets, it's lowest prices, and it's guaranteed. And the other thing that is guaranteed is 24/7 coverage on Locked On Sports Today. You can get it all, including baseball coverage, over there by getting the talking heads off of your TV and getting the local experts that you're looking for. So subscribe over here on YouTube to Locked On Sports Today and check it out on Amazon Fire TV. Now, as much as I'm excited about having a more physical player on the nickel, which then allows you to do a couple of things outside that we're going to talk about next week that I'm excited about, There's also a possibility, because we have seen some injuries at the safety spot the last couple of years. We have to switch around some of the players there. You also have some injuries that we've seen at the outside corner spot. So what happens if for some reason there's an injury in camp that forces Charmarri Conner back to a true safety role, and you're going to take him out of the nickel? Is there a scenario that you specifically want to see happen in terms of manning that spot?
If you have to take him out of the nickel, I guess it's going to be a guy like Nick Jones is going to step in and be that guy. Maybe it's going to be Najee Johnson. There's lots of different ways they could go. I can't see them going back to Trent McDuffie. I think it would also depend on the matchup, how they decide that they want to do that. But the interesting thing to me is, we talk about Connor having to move back to safety. I would think you'd have to have two safeties out in order for him to move back to safety, because I think Jaden Hicks is going to be able to step in and not necessarily need another guy to come in that route, unless you're going with the three safety set and one of the starters is hurt. I mean, then that's a different situation.
Absolutely. Now, that's not saying that we're not thinking Brian Cook's not going to make it back. He looks great to all accounts at this point, and we are going to go over safeties here in the coming weeks before camp as well. So don't miss that part. But that's a fair point. There are a couple of options there. I think you outlined the easiest one, and that is Nick Jones, who we didn't see a whole lot of last season, but a guy that also fits the bill in having that physicality in his game. In college, I loved that about him. It was my favorite aspect of his college film coming out. And he's got some quick twitch. He's a little bit smaller. I won't call him small because he is nearly 6 foot, a little bit taller than Najee Johnson is. But he's a guy that can just slide in that spot, and you don't disrupt anything else. Right now, Najee Johnson's running the right outside corner spot.
Yeah, and that's the big question is, when we talk about offensive line, one of the things we always talk about is, what if we take one of these other starters and move them to another position? How does it affect the other? You get worse at two positions versus just moving somebody in and having maybe a worse position at just one. So that's really the question is do they feel like maybe a Josh Williams or a Jalen Watson can step in for Najee Johnson, and Najee Johnson can move over to nickel corner in that scenario? That's possible, considering Williams and Watson have already started for the Chiefs multiple different times over the past couple of seasons. So it's going to be interesting, and that's one of the things that really makes it difficult to figure out what they're going to do in the quarter room and really the DB room overall, because you talk about a guy like Connor who can play safety as well. You talk about a guy like Nick Jones, who we thought was going to see more time in previous years that hasn't. And now you have Najee Johnson coming back. If he's a starter at one of the outside corner positions, where Nick Jones probably isn't getting on the field unless somebody is hurt.
And that's fair. We always talk about this in the draft cycle, right? It's not just based on size. Trent McDuffie is the shorter at 5'10", so is Najee Johnson. But I think if you're trying to put the best, like we talk about on the offensive line, if you're trying to put the best three corners on the field, Trent still should be on one side trying to take that away like L'Jarius Sneed did. And I would move Najee Johnson to let either Josh Williams or Jalen Watson, depending on the day. Maybe Haddon pushes them. We'll talk about the outside guys coming up. I would make that switch because I do feel like corners are a little bit more modular, a little bit more individual, because they are often on islands no matter what they're doing, whereas the O-line's a little bit more in proximity. But that's just what I would do.
No, and I agree with that. But the argument that I would have and the question I would have is, what is their plan for McDuffie this year? And I know we're talking about slot corner, but he has something to do with it too, because when you look at what they're going to do at that corner position, it's a question of, okay, are they going to have him travel? Because if they have him travel, it changes everything for everybody. And they all have to know what their changes are going to be. So maybe that even plays into it. If McDuffie is slotted to travel with the guy most of the game and you get an injury in game, how does that affect what they're going to do at the corner position? Are you going to feel comfortable putting in a guy like Nick Jones? Or are you going to move Najee Johnson back and put in Jalen Watson or Joshua Williams at the outside? I mean, that's all part of it. It could be a game-to-game thing, and it could also just be it could be matchup specific of different players being on the field. I mean, there's all different sorts of things when you start talking about corners, because it isn't like offensive line in the fact that mainly your entire offensive line plays the entire game. corners come in and out and receivers come in and out, and all the matchups and who you think is going to be best in situational football is a lot different on defense in that regard.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I have my druthers about the way that I would do it, but it also plays into account how much depth that you have. So are there other options than the three guys that we've talked about to this point? Yes, there is a little bit. It's not super deep, but could a rookie make some inroads in this rotation at the nickel back? We're going to find that out coming out on the backside of this here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And welcome back, folks, to what we are previewing right now is 24/7 coverage on Locked On Sports Today. Make sure you subscribe over there. I'm excited about this because you and I would probably approach it differently if there's an injury where you have to replace the starter, but it goes beyond that. There are a couple of other names that we have to consider. Nick Jones, we've touched on, but outside of the top two options, I would put Nick next. And if he doesn't come along or there's some hiccup in his development, he turns an ankle at practice, whatever it is, you have to go to the practice squad possibly for the nickel spot because you're going to keep a lot of outside corners is my guess. We're going to talk about our roster predictions coming up in the next couple of weeks before camp opens. But there's names here, particularly Christian Roland Wallace, rookie, put in some good snaps, has a couple of drawbacks, isn't quite the physical guy, doesn't quite have the turn and run speed, but just has a knack for being in the hip pocket of slot receivers. And I'm pretty comfortable with that. A lot of the rest of these corners on this roster are not really that type. So my question for you would be, what would you think of a rookie having to man that spot if Nick Jones couldn't go or something? Or would you try to make the one other player that I think is an outside guy now that maybe could give you some snaps inside in Echo Boydo? Would you have to keep him on the practice squad as well just to have that possibility?
Well, and I'm going to throw a wrench in what you're talking about, and I'm going to say it's possible you go either of those directions. I'm not going to be shocked if, and this would be more of a situation where specifically in game, in my mind, but maybe if one of your guys gets injured, maybe you drop one of the safeties down and one of the other safeties down, Jaden Hicks, or I'm not saying Reed is going to do it on a regular basis, but maybe for specific plays he could go in and play nickel on somebody. It's not a great scenario, but you're going to have to do things in games if you get injuries. So I do think that there's some outside the box things that you could do when you start talking about the practice squad. You're right. I mean, it could be a guy like Christian Roland Wallace, but it also could be that it's somebody that's not even on the roster now. And I wonder if that's really the truth of it is maybe they'll be looking at filling that because they've got two guys right now that I think they feel pretty good about, Nick Jones and Charmarri Conner. And probably they would feel okay with Najee Johnson being in there. But I think that if they want him on the outside, that's a position that you need to look at and say, okay, we feel good about our first two. If they don't feel great about Roland Wallace, look at the waiver wire when it comes up. I mean, there's going to be somebody that's going to be released, and you can bring somebody in on the practice squad. You could bring in another guy on the roster if you absolutely had to. But with all of the corners that they have on this roster, it's going to be hard to cut somebody else to bring in another slot corner type.
You are not
without injuries. Sorry, I'll just caveat that.
Yeah. That's always the monkey wrench that you have to throw in there, right? Just bottom line, my gut tells me that if Connor has to play safety or he isn't available for a game, I want to see Najee out there and get some relief reps from Nick Jones. And I think that's what I feel most comfortable with. Is that, do you think, a detriment to the defense overall?
It's tough because the question becomes, is Najee, we haven't seen them in team. They're doing air reps right now. So it's really not hard to know what has Joshua Williams done to improve this offseason? What has Jalen Watson done to improve this offseason? What has Najee Johnson done to improve this offseason? And I know you're asking about Najee in the slot, but we don't even know what he's going to look like at corner right now. I mean, he's coming back from an injury, so you assume he's going to be available and ready to go for training camp. But how's he going to step in and how's he going to fill that role? And then compare that to what you would get in what Joshua Williams has brought and Jalen Watson has brought. They've both been successful at times, but it hasn't been consistent. If they could get to a point where they could be consistent, they could be having 2 years left in their Chiefs career and be getting big paydays elsewhere, but their consistency is the problem. And that's, I think, why Najee has a chance.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think at the end of the day, what we have to remember is that they have found not only ways to develop their talent. Notice that we haven't talked about where a guy was drafted or whether he was a free agent at all in this process because of what the coaching staff is able to do. And I do feel that there's enough variability there that they'll be able to coach their way around any potential problems. But I do feel overall, this is the biggest transition in that secondary. Trent McDuffie moving from nickel to outside doesn't bother me much. Najee Johnson, who lined up at nickel as well last year, moving to outside doesn't bother me as much. It's about, for me, the guy who's manning that slot nickel defender that really is the crux of where other teams are going to try to attack.
Yeah, and it's going to be it's hard to know where they're going to go. I would say that you look at it and you have to hope that Connor is able to stay healthy and the safeties are able to stay healthy. Although, like I said, I think that Hicks is going to be the guy that they're going to bring off first rather than move Connor back. Although I guess it depends on the defense and what they're trying to do at that point. This roster is just so varied. When you look at all the different things that they do, it is just so varied in the amount of players they have at the corner position, and specifically, they have a ton more outside than they have inside. Don't get me wrong, but all the corners that they have, there's going to be somebody I would think on this roster that they're going to put in a nickel spot that maybe we haven't even talked about at this point, just because they want to see what you can do, because that is an Andy Reid thing, and it goes for any type of position. It's going to be a question of, okay, what can you do for us?
Yep. It's got to be a team effort, and it's got to be something that you are bringing that's lifting the rest of it.
What about Kelvin Joseph? He hasn't played a ton in slot, but he has been playing. He has been showing up.
We're going to talk about him in the outside corner group because that's the only place he can play.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm just saying he has played in the interior. He has played in the slot at times. Not saying it's a great move, but if he forces his way on the roster, right?
I think he could push his way onto the roster, but you're right. He has been put in that position in the past, and that is why he was available, because it was not something, even looking at his college film, that was in the best scenario for him. Honestly, right. He's a guy that I would keep on the practice squad no matter what, because if there is a safety injury, I think he can come in and play safety and give you some relief there. I don't see him as a nickel corner, but, you know, as you said, we haven't seen a lot of him. Nobody gets to watch OTAs. So when we get to training camp, folks, the first couple of days are going to be very eye-opening. He is a name that is on my watch list, and we're going to give you that before training camp opens as well. So make sure that you're with us. I'm pretty excited about the slot corner group as a whole, because there's a lot of toys you can put there, a lot of things that Spags can do to really mess up some offenses. And I'm really here to just blow up opposing coordinators, and that's what I'm looking forward to the most.
You know what? One of the fun things about Connor, and we didn't even talk about this, was his football intelligence, his football IQ seems to be off the charts. And when you start talking about the fun things that Spags is going to be able to do with the slot corners, that's part of it. Is he's going to be able to mix and match and throw people in different positions. And in a scenario where maybe Connor, you would think Connor is going to come out and be the slot corner, maybe he ends up being a safety and one of the safeties drops down for a play or two with just different looks. I mean, There's all different types of things that they could be doing, and we'll see. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun to see how this roster turns out, especially at the corner position. And looking forward to talking about the wide receiver position next week, because there's a ton to talk about there as well.
Yes, there is. And if you remember the days of Rashad Fenton dropping from the nickel spot all the way to the too high safety spot, that's within Jamari Connor's range as well. Lots of things that can come on. Wide receivers to battle it are coming up next week, as well as Matt Derrick, and back on to our preparations for the three-peat run. I hope you guys will be with us. If you're new to this channel, you made it this far, welcome. Good job. Make sure you like this vid, and make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Check out all of our outlets at kcchiefscorner.com, rgrfootball.com, NFL33.com. Check out the rest of the Locked On Podcast Network, because we're 5 days a week, everywhere, all the time. Make sure you check it out. We appreciate you spending your time with us today. Have a great weekend. We're going to be back talking pass catchers. Everybody wants to know about them early next week. So thanks for your time. Thanks for being here today. We will definitely be back with you next time.